There are stories we carry in silence, hidden deep inside, where loneliness lingers and desire seems like a memory too far gone. Nights grow colder, the bed feels wider, and the soul whispers for something it has been denied for too long. Then, when all hope seems buried, a spark arrives uninvited, a glance, a touch, a presence that breaks through walls built by grief and time. What begins as a flicker of hunger soon becomes an awakening, a fire reborn in tenderness, proving that passion doesn't die with age it waits. It matures, it returns stronger than ever. At 60, love didn't fade. It returned, burning with both intensity and gentleness, reminding that the body can still tremble and the heart can still surrender. Welcome to this story where desire, love, and rediscovery live in every word. Stay with me and let this journey touch your soul. The nights stretched on endlessly, and silence became louder than any voice could ever be. The bed that once carried warmth felt like a hollow expanse, sheets cold against skin that longed to be remembered. There is a loneliness that isn't just about being alone, but about being unseen, untouched, and unspoken to. It seeps into the bones until it feels like part of the body itself. The empty side of the bed wasn't just empty. It was a reminder of years gone, of a life that once felt whole, of moments that would never return. There was a time when laughter filled the air, when the nights were alive with conversation, even with the smallest touches, hands brushing in the dark, a kiss that lingered without words, a body that reached across the sheets for comfort. But when all of that vanishes, when love is stolen by time and fate, the silence feels like a thief that keeps robbing even after everything is already gone. What used to be companionship turned into memories, and memories, no matter how vivid, cannot warm the skin in the stillness of night. Every evening carried the same ritual. The dim light switched off, the soft sound of the clock ticking, and then the long wait for sleep that never arrived easily. Sleep had become a stranger. Instead of rest, the mind wandered through corridors of the past, replaying touches that once felt so familiar, kisses that used to melt the day away, words whispered in the darkness that held more weight than any daylight promise. That was when the body would betray itself, aching not just from age but from absence. The ache wasn't about physical desire alone. It was about the hunger to feel alive, to feel close to another, to remember what it meant to be more than a figure moving through the motions of life. There is a kind of loneliness no one speaks about. People imagine that at a certain age the hunger fades, that the need for closeness grows smaller, that desire simply disappears. But the truth is, it only grows sharper when it's denied. The body doesn't forget the memory of warmth, and the soul doesn't forget how it feels to be seen. When nights grew colder, it wasn't just the chill of air pressing against bare arms. It was the weight of an untouched body, the burden of silence where whispers should have been, the hollowness of a heart that had no other to beat against. The days passed quietly, faces smiled politely, neighbors spoke kindly, children called once in a while, but none of that reached the part of the soul that craved something deeper. There is a difference between company and closeness. Company fills the room with sound, but closeness fills the soul with fire. What was missing wasn't just a presence, but the intimacy of being known fully, of being held as if the world could stop and nothing else mattered. Loneliness is cruel because it hides itself behind routine. There were errands, chores, conversations, but beneath every act, there was an undercurrent of longing. Longing when seeing couples walk hand in hand. Longing when catching the scent of cologne that reminded of nights long ago. Longing when standing in front of the mirror, asking silently if anyone would ever see beauty there again. And with each passing year, that question grew heavier. Would anyone ever touch the skin again, not out of pity, not out of duty, but out of raw desire and love? Would anyone's hands ever know these curves, this softness, this ache, and hold them with reverence instead of dismissal? In the darkness, those questions screamed. There were times when the body trembled not from cold, but from a hunger buried too long. Times when fingertips grazed the sheets, pretending for a moment that they belonged to someone else's hand. Times when the heart raced from nothing but memory, the ghost of passion flickering like a flame that refused to die, no matter how much the years tried to smother it. And still, with every morning, the bed remained untouched, the silence unbroken, the soul unanswered. It was not shameful to crave. It was human. It was alive. And yet, the world taught that past a certain age, longing was foolish, that love was for the young, that passion belonged only to early years. But deep within, the truth burned louder than any lie. Love had no expiration. Desire had no boundary. The body still knew the language of touch, and the soul still cried out for it, even when the lips stayed silent. There were moments of surrender when it felt like the years would pass in the same rhythm, nights as cold as the last, days as hollow as the ones before, and yet something inside refused to die. The loneliness was heavy, but it was also proof that the heart was still beating, still capable of longing, still waiting for the spark that could light it again. There was a belief, quiet but unshakable, that even in the dusk of life there was room for dawn. So the nights continued, the silence stretched, the ache deepened, but deep within the soul whispered its truth. Love had not ended, passion had not disappeared. It was only waiting, waiting for hands strong enough to break through the loneliness, gentle enough to remind what tenderness felt like, and fiery enough to prove that even at 60, the body could still burn and the heart could still rise again. And that waiting, though heavy, kept life alive. It kept breath from being just air. It turned silence into a promise even when it hurt, because somewhere in the unknown there was still the hope that one touch could change everything. Even after years of shadows, the heart still believed. It happened when least expected, in a moment that seemed ordinary, almost forgettable, yet something in it shifted the weight of everything. There was no intention, no searching, no desire to stumble into something new. The days had carried on in their usual rhythm, filled with silence, with memories tucked away neatly, with the quiet resignation that the heart had already lived its greatest chapters. But then he appeared, and nothing was the same again. The first glance should not have meant anything. People pass by every day, faces blending into one another, voices barely remembered. But this one was different. His eyes didn't just look, they lingered. Not in a way that felt heavy or intrusive, but in a way that seemed to reach past the surface, as if they knew the secret that had been buried for so long. There was warmth there, a quiet pull that unsettled the calm facade built over years. One look, and suddenly the walls that had stood strong against grief and time began to tremble. It wasn't attraction in the simple sense. It was recognition of being seen after being invisible for far too long. The body stiffened in surprise, but the heart leapt quietly, whispering truths that hadn't been spoken in years. It had been so long since eyes held such a charge, since a presence could alter the very air in the room. It was disarming, almost frightening, to realize how easily the heart could stir again, how quickly the soul could remember the taste of longing. The touch came later, small, almost accidental, but it lingered. A hand brushing against mine, fingers grazing just a little longer than politeness required. That was all it took. The world has ways of disguising fire in the smallest of sparks, and that touch carried the kind of electricity that made the breath catch. It wasn't just skin against skin, it was a reminder of what it felt like to be alive, to be wanted, to be connected to another in a way that went beyond words. The body responded before the mind could protest. A shiver, a quickening heartbeat, a warmth that spread from that single point of contact. Years of silence, years of loneliness, years of believing that desire was gone forever, shaken loose by something so small yet so undeniable. It was almost unbearable in its simplicity, just a hand, just a glance, but within it lived the awakening of everything thought lost. The mind tried to fight it, Reason whispered that it was foolish, that it meant nothing, that walls existed for protection. Yet the soul laughed softly, reminding that no matter how much time had passed, no matter how much grief had built those walls, they were never meant to hold forever. Love has a way of slipping through cracks, of finding the smallest opening and blooming into something impossible to ignore. Every meeting after that was different. The air carried a charge. Words that would have once been casual now lingered with weight. Every laugh felt like a secret being shared. Every pause filled with a tension both thrilling and terrifying. And when his hand reached again, it was no accident. It rested with intention, fingers curling gently as if asking permission, but also knowing the answer was already yes. The way it stirred something deep inside was almost overwhelming. Not just desire, but a sense of being awakened, of being called back into a world of feeling that had been locked away for too long. There was guilt at first, as though betraying the years of grief, as though letting go of loneliness meant letting go of love that had once existed. But soon it became clear, this wasn't betrayal, it was rebirth. Every glance became a conversation of its own, every touch an unspoken promise. What had started as something so small grew larger each time, as though the universe was conspiring to show that life was not finished, that passion was not buried, that love could still bloom even in the soil of loss. And the truth of it was undeniable. Something long thought dead was alive again, pulsing, burning, demanding to be felt. There were moments of hesitation, of fear that it might all be too much, too late, too risky. But then there were moments when none of that mattered. His presence alone became enough to steady the doubts, to remind that living fully meant embracing what the heart knew, even when the mind resisted. And every time his hand found mine, every time his touch lingered, the resistance grew weaker until it vanished completely. It wasn't planned, it wasn't searched for, and yet it was the most real thing felt in years. Love has a way of coming uninvited, slipping quietly into places where it's least expected, and turning everything upside down. And when it comes, it doesn't ask permission. It simply arrives, settles in the soul, and demands to be lived. One glance, one touch, that was all it took to awaken everything that had been asleep. One spark to remind that the heart was still alive, still capable of burning, still capable of being consumed in fire and tenderness once again. And in that spark, everything changed. The first time his hand touched mine, it felt as if something long asleep stirred awake inside me. It was more than warmth, more than comfort. It was a surge of life that coursed through veins that had been silent for years. His hand carried a gentleness that disarmed me, but beneath it there was fire, a fire that both frightened and thrilled me. It was the kind of fire that reminded me that desire never truly dies. It only waits for the right moment, the right touch to rise again. I had almost forgotten what it felt like to tremble from something other than cold. I had almost convinced myself that longing was something belonging to youth, that age had quietly stolen it away. Yet the moment his fingers brushed my skin, all of those lies dissolved. My body remembered what my mind had tried to bury. My heart quickened, my breath caught, and I knew in that instant that something had changed forever. It wasn't just the touch of a man. It was the return of something I thought I had lost forever. His hands didn't just hold, they spoke. They carried words that lips never had to say. They told me that I was still seen, still wanted, still capable of being awakened in ways I had almost forgotten. The weight of his touch settled deep into me, not as a burden, but as a release. For years I had carried emptiness, and suddenly, with one stroke of his palm, emptiness became fullness. There was fire in his fingertips, but not the reckless kind. It was the fire that burns steady, the fire that warms from within and makes the body ache with hunger, not just for more of the body, but for more of the soul. His hands knew how to press gently, how to linger long enough to send shivers racing, how to remind me that passion is not tied to youth. It belongs to the heart, and as long as the heart beats, it burns. Desire came back not as guilt, not as something to hide, but as proof that I was alive. For too long, I had believed that wanting was shameful at my age, that the world expected me to quiet the needs of my body and silence the hunger of my heart. But his touch erased every trace of shame. It replaced it with wonder, with gratitude, with the fierce truth that passion was never gone. It had only been waiting, sleeping like embers in the ashes, waiting for someone brave enough to stir them into flame. The first kiss was the confirmation of everything his hands had promised. When his lips found mine, I felt the years fall away. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a claiming, a reminder that love and desire do not vanish. They only hide until the right soul comes along to wake them. His lips moved slowly at first, but beneath the softness there was urgency, a hunger that matched my own. And when I gave in, when I let my body answer, it was as though I had been holding my breath for years and was finally able to breathe again. His hands roamed with reverence, exploring as though every inch of me was something sacred. Not rushed, not careless, but with a kind of patience that felt both tender and consuming. Every touch, every caress, every pause spoke of passion and restraint balanced perfectly. It was a dance of fire and gentleness, one that left me trembling, gasping, alive in ways I hadn't known in years. The hunger that rose in me surprised me. It wasn't just about the body. It was about being cherished, about being seen, about being touched with a fire that said, "You are still here, you are still worthy, you are still alive." His hands carried me back to myself, to the woman I thought had vanished. And as his fire burned into me, my own fire rose to meet it, wild and unashamed. In his arms, shame had no place. Only truth existed. The truth that passion has no age, that desire doesn't fade with time, that love expressed through touch can heal even the deepest wounds of loneliness. The body answered before words could, arching, trembling, surrendering, not with fear but with joy. For the first time in so long, I felt not just alive, but whole. The way he held me was more than hunger. It was worship. The way his lips traced my skin, the way his hands moved with both urgency and reverence, the way he looked into my eyes as though searching for my soul. It was all a reminder that this was not just desire. This was love, fierce and undeniable, written in every breath, every heartbeat, every touch. Desire was not a weakness. It was not a sin. It was proof that within me there was still fire, still light, still the power to love and to be loved. His hands taught me that. His fire reminded me, and his tenderness sealed it in me. When it was over, when the storm of passion softened into the quiet of closeness, I lay against him and realized that something inside me had shifted permanently. No longer did I feel like time had stolen everything from me. No longer did I believe that love was behind me. His hands had brought me back, his fire had awakened me, and his love had shown me that even in the twilight of life, the dawn of desire could rise again, brighter than ever. And in that awakening, I knew I was alive again. It began as a hunger, a quiet need that had grown from years of silence, years of longing, years of being untouched and unseen. At first, it felt like only the body was answering, reaching for warmth that had been denied too long, craving the comfort of hands, of lips, of closeness that could melt away the weight of loneliness. But as the moments unfolded, something deeper emerged. What started as need quickly became more than desire. It became the rediscovery of a flame I thought had died. A flame that burned not only with heat, but with tenderness, with a love so raw and consuming that it felt both new and ancient at the same time. His touch was not rushed, not careless. Every movement carried intention, every kiss held meaning. His hands did not just stir fire, they carried reverence as though every inch of me mattered, as though nothing had been forgotten by time. And in that devotion, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel for so long. I felt loved deeply and without question. My body yielded first, trembling under his fire, but soon after my heart surrendered too, opening in ways I didn't know were still possible. The passion between us was undeniable, but it was more than that. There was a softness to it, a tenderness woven through every moment. When his lips pressed against mine, it wasn't only hunger, it was promise. When his arms wrapped around me, it wasn't only to possess, it was to protect, to cherish, to remind me that even after years of emptiness, love could return with a force greater than before. The fire inside me burned fiercely, but it was balanced with a sweetness that made every touch sacred. For so long, I had believed that love faded with time, that passion weakened with age. I had carried the weight of loneliness, convinced that the days of burning desire and trembling intimacy were behind me. But in his arms, I discovered the lie in that belief. Love doesn't fade, it deepens. Passion doesn't weaken, it matures, becoming stronger, more real, more consuming, because it knows the value of being found again after being lost. There was a moment, lying against him, where I realized that what I felt wasn't just desire. It was trust, it was surrender, it was the recognition that my heart, after being silent for so long, was beating with new life. My body had given in, yes, but more than that, my heart had given itself fully, willingly, fearlessly, to be held that way, to be seen that way, to be touched as if I was both fire and treasure. It was more than passion. It was love, reborn in the quiet storm of tenderness and heat. Every kiss became a declaration, every caress a vow. His passion ignited mine, but his tenderness steadied it, turning every shiver into a song of closeness, every gasp into an expression of trust. I had forgotten that love could feel like this, both overwhelming and gentle, both fiery and soft, both urgent and eternal. In that balance, I felt a truth I had long denied, that love, even at 60, is not only possible but perhaps even stronger, because it carries the wisdom of years, the weight of loss, and the fierce joy of rediscovery. What astonished me most was not just the fire, but the tenderness. Desire can consume, but tenderness heals. In his touch there was both. He did not just awaken my body, he restored my soul. He reminded me that love is not about age. It is not about time. It is not about how much of life has passed. It is about presence, about seeing and being seen, about giving and receiving without fear. As his fire burned into me, I felt the ashes of loneliness scatter, replaced by the glowing truth that passion was never gone, only waiting. And as his tenderness wrapped around me, I felt whole, safe, alive in a way I hadn't dared to hope for again. What began as need raw, undeniable, transformed into something higher, something purer. It was love rising from the embers of silence, blazing brighter than it ever had before. And in that moment I knew. At 60, love had not left me. It had returned, stronger, deeper, and more real than I had ever known. Love doesn't disappear, it waits quietly for the moment it's called back to life. This story was proof that loneliness can be broken, that sparks can awaken even after years of silence, that passion and tenderness can be reborn stronger than ever. If this touched your heart, if you felt the truth in these words, then stay with me. Subscribe, like, and share, because more stories are waiting, stories of love that lives beyond time, stories that may just awaken something in you too.